This episode of Gather and Go is sponsored by Coastal Mississippi. Play Coastal Mississippi. 62 miles of shoreline, outdoor adventures, casinos, fishing, and fantastic food. Perfect for fun-filled itineraries. Visit coastalmississippi.com and go have some fun for fun's sake. Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to Gather and Go, the podcast that helps you plan, promote, and lead better trips. I'm your host, Brian Jewell. I am utterly thrilled that you decided to spend some of your time with us today. And as always, our promise to you is that we're going to do everything we can to make that investment of your time worth your while. Now, I'm really excited to bring you today's featured conversation because I'm going to introduce you to Kyle Campbell, who is the founder of a tour company called Sudden Journeys. And Kyle is doing some really cool work in the intergenerational tour space. That's right. She runs tours that attract baby boomers and Gen Xers and millennials and even some Gen Z. We're going to talk all about how she plans tours that not only appeal to those various demographics, but actually serve those people well and help them find common ground and community together. That's a conversation you definitely want to hear. Before we get there, though, let's start off with some travel news you may have missed. The U.S. Department of State is testing an online passport renewal system. Earlier this summer, the State Department opened a public beta of an online passport renewal system. The test, which is currently available to a limited number of users, is designed to work out the kinks in an electronic renewal system before the State Department implements it nationwide. In this new system, users must create an account on login.gov, the federal government's single sign-on service. Participants can then fill out a digital passport renewal application, pay the renewal fees, and submit new passport photos online. Now, early users report that the system accepted snapshots taken on their smartphones, eliminating the need to pay for third-party passport photo services. Beta users have also reported receiving their new passports very quickly, sometimes only a few days after submitting their online renewals. The State Department cautions, however, that this quick turnaround will probably slow down to the standard 4 to 6 weeks once the program is fully open to the public. The online renewal system, combined with an online application system, also in development for first-time passport holders, is expected to serve around 5 million Americans per year once fully operational. Now, some users will still need to send applications by mail, however, if they are changing details such as their names or birth dates. And online systems will not be available to process expedited applications and renewals. Well, now it's time for the road tip segment of our show. This is the part of every episode where we dig deep into our bag of travel knowledge from decades on the road and bring you tips to make your next trip less stressful and more successful. You know, thinking about passports, I remember some of the times I have been on trips and have heard stories from friends who have been on international trips and have run into passport snafus. People in their group forgot their passports. People who planned on taking the trip didn't realize their passports were out of date. I even had a friend who was leading a group and didn't know his passport was out of date until like a couple days before the trip. It was a whole drama. And if you are leading groups abroad, that's the kind of drama you want to avoid. Well, I'll never forget the first trip I went on that I had to carry a passport. I was a student. I think I was, like 14 years old. And I was with a group of students going to Costa Rica. And our leader on that trip was very experienced. He had traveled all over the world. And he was not the type of person to say, hey, everybody, give me your passports. I'm going to take care of them for you. No, what he did instead was drive home how important it was for us to make sure we knew where our passports were at every moment. And now this was in the 90s. It was before cell phones, before you could easily FaceTime somebody at home if you ran into problems. So if any of us had lost our passports on that trip, it would have been a massive headache and would have, frankly, probably ruined the trip for everybody. So here is what he did, and it's what I want to share with you. He checked our passports over and over and over throughout the trip. So he didn't hold on to them. He gave us the responsibility of holding on to them ourselves. But at every point along the way, he would conduct these random passport checks and have everybody in the group literally pull out their passport and hold it up in the air so that he could see that we had it and make sure we weren't going to have any problems going forward. And I think this is a really good system for group leaders to implement, honestly, with groups of all ages. I think it's critical with student groups, but even if you have an adult group with some people who are not, let's say, experienced international travelers, then having a system of frequent passport checks can really save you and your customers a nightmarish situation on the road. So what do I mean by passport checks? I mean, literally do what my group leader did. Have everybody hold up their passport at critical moments in the trip so that you can walk down the aisle of the motor coach or count heads in the group and make sure nobody has a passport issue. Now, this starts with checking passports as soon as people register for a trip. You need to ask them if they have a passport. If they say yes, ask them to send you a photo of the passport. A digital photo is fine, just something they snap with their cell phone. And then keep that photo in a file for the entire trip. Keep everybody's passport photos in some file on your computer or in the cloud that you can access easily. This will be a huge help if anybody does lose a passport or runs into any other kind of trouble. So number one, ask if they have a passport and collect that photo. If they say they don't have a passport, then you tell them, run, don't walk, run to your nearest post office or passport agency to start the paperwork on that passport. Because if they go ahead and purchase the trip and put off purchasing that passport, then when departure day comes, if their passport hasn't arrived yet, no matter how hard you try, they're not getting on that trip and there's nothing you can do to change it. So you want to make sure you emphasize the importance of passports from the very beginning. And then once you are ready for the trip to go, you need to check passports frequently. What do I mean? Well, when you gather at your departure place, whether it is a local pickup place at your community organization or it's the airport that everybody's going to leave from, have everyone bring their passports, hold them in their hands, show them to you before the departure vehicle leaves, before you go to the ticketing counter, before you go through the security checkpoint. Check those passports. Now, you're going to go through security, you're going to get on the plane, and when you get through the airport, if you're at a connecting airport, check those passports again. Make sure they didn't get lost. Before you get on that international flight, check the passports again. After you get off the international flight, when everybody is kind of gathering their things, check those passports. You don't want them to get left on the plane before people can clear customs and immigration in the arrival country. After you do clear customs, before you get on the motor coach to begin your adventure wherever you are, check those passports to make sure nobody left them somewhere in the airport. Now, once you arrive at your hotel, you don't have to be quite as dogmatic about this, especially if you are staying in one property. Now, I would always encourage people to put their passports in the safe in the room, much safer than actually carrying them on your person. Now, when you do need to check again, though, is if you're on a trip where you're going to transfer from one hotel to another during the trip. This is a time when people can lose passports, especially in the shuffle of repacking their bags, getting ready to go from one place to another. So before you leave a hotel, after your group has checked out, before you hit the road, check those passports. Make sure nobody has left them behind. Finally, when you check out of your final hotel and begin the journey toward the airport to start your trip home, check those passports. Do it at every step along the way until your group is safely in the United States. If everyone has a passport, nobody has a problem. If somebody loses a passport, hopefully by checking them often, you can help them find it before trouble begins. That is the road tip of the week. Now, before we move on, I want to take a minute and share a little bit of news from us. Now, if you've been listening for a while, you may know that one of the things we do here at the Group Travel Leader is partner with destinations around the country and sometimes around the world to host familiarization tours to bring travel planners like you on the road with us to see some of these great places firsthand and get some inspiration and some insight for planning your own group trips to those destinations. Well, I have been telling you for a while that we had some cool trips lined up for 2025. And I've been saying that I can't tell you where they are. Well, guess what? Finally, I can tell you about one of our 2025 familiarization tours. March 20 through 24 next year, we are going to be in Louisiana's capital city region. That's Baton Rouge and many of the communities that surround it. That is going to be an excellent trip. This is a part of the state I have visited many times. I absolutely love it there. I'm going to be on this trip, and I would love for you to be there to join me. On this trip, we are going to be hubbing and spoking out of Baton Rouge. So you get to stay in one hotel the whole time, which is a treat. We're going to see things like the Louisiana state capitol there in Baton Rouge, the capital city. And as well as places like the Global Wildlife Center, which is a really fun wildlife park where you have a very up close and very personal encounters with animals from all over the world. That's in Tangipahoa Parish. We're also going to visit the Myrtles in St. Francisville. And since Louisiana is celebrating the Year of Food in 2025, you can be guaranteed that you are going to have some delicious food along the way. Now, I'll be honest, every time I've been to Louisiana, I've had delicious food everywhere I go. So this is not a departure from the norm. But if the food is fantastic in any ordinary year, you can bet the food next year during the Year of Food is going to knock your socks off. So how do you join me on this great fam tour in Louisiana? It is very simple. You go to grouptravelleader.com/LA-fam. That's LA as in Louisiana -fam, FAM. Fill out the application form there and get that application in as soon as you can, because I always say this about our fam tours. Every tour we run has limited capacity, and we always get many, many more applications than we have spots on the fam. So your best chance at getting one of those spots is to get us your application information as soon as possible. So right now, go to grouptravelleader.com/LA-fam. And don't worry, that link is in the show notes if you'd rather just find it and click through. Fill out that application form. And I can't wait to see some of you in Louisiana's capital city region next March. Well, it's just about time for us to move into our featured conversation with Kyle Campbell. Now, as we get ready for that, I want to remind you that you don't need to worry about taking notes, because I'm going to have all the notes you need on our show notes page. And I'm also going to come back after the interview with a wrap up of some of the most important things that Kyle had to say. And I guarantee you are going to find Kyle thoughtful and insightful. She's going to have some ideas you may not have thought about that could make your next trip so much more meaningful and memorable. I'm really excited for you to hear this. And hey, after the wrap up, I want to encourage you to stick around, because I'm going to take some time to talk about an article that has been making its way around the internet about why people should stop traveling in groups. Now, you bet I've got some thoughts on that. And that's going to be the topic of today's Hot Minute. You won't want to miss that. We'll be right back with Kyle Campbell.
Let's go, my kiddos! Rise and shine! I am tired of early morning alarms and sitting in carpool lines. I want to relax with a spa day. No more family meetings. I want a family outing. Booked a big one there. My to-do list has taken over. How about a to-dream list instead? First up, play Coastal and go have some fun for fun's sake.
Make a vacation declaration of your own and start planning your escape to the Mississippi Gulf Coast at coastalmississippi.com.
All right, everybody. My guest today has curated and led tours throughout Europe and the UK for over 2 decades. Drawing on her experience as a trip coordinator, travel planner, guide, and tour director, In 2020, she launched Sudden Journeys Travel, a boutique tour company that creates multi-generational experiences focused on inspiring curiosity, wonder, and deep cross-cultural connections. Kyle Campbell, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Ryan. I'm excited to be here.
I am so glad to have you here. Your story is a unique one, I feel like, in the tourism industry. For starters, it's unique because you kind of came into tourism fairly earlier in your career, as opposed to many people who, have some other career and then switch over to tourism. Can you kind of give our audience an overview of your tourism journey, sort of how you got started in the industry and what the road that brought you to today kind of looked like?
It started with, I needed a job. And I was a college student. I was in art school in Savannah, Georgia. I also grew up with horses, riding horses. And there was a day where I was coming out of an art class, out of painting, and across the building was the stables for where in Savannah there's all these carriage tours, and they would park the carriages and the horses lived it. So I went over and I said, "Do you guys happen to need any stable hands to muck stalls or groom horses?" And they said, "No, but we do need tour guides." Mm-hmm. And I thought about it. I thought, well, I like people. I enjoy history. I love storytelling. This would be a new challenge. So why not? And it was honestly the hardest test I've ever taken to become a licensed guide in the state of Georgia. It was over 500 questions and I could only miss 5. And if I had missed more than that, I would have to retake the test. And as a college kid at 20, $50 is a lot of money to retake a test. So I would practice at night, riding my bike around the squares, calling all the stories. And as I was training to be a guide, I got to ride with the different drivers and hear the way the guides would tell their stories. And so it was interesting because I got to hear the same information, but told differently. And that was really helpful to realize I had the freedom to tell stories the way I wanted to. And so after a few months, I became a licensed guide and I was driving horse carriages around Savannah. But because I was a student, most of my tours were at night. And so if you don't know this, but Savannah is one of the most haunted cities in America. So I typically was leading ghost tours with a lot of Girl Scouts because also the founder of Girl Scouts is from Savannah. So basically I was scaring Girl Scout girls. But that was the first entrance, was as a 20-year-old tour guide in Savannah, Georgia. And then I moved overseas. I spent time backpacking around Europe and then decided I was going to live in Italy for a period of time and ended up finding a job. I needed money again. And I found a job to work with EF Tours as a tour leader. So I was trained, was hired, went through their intense training. But then by the end of it, they told me they couldn't give me enough work for the season and I needed more money. So I moved back home, was back in my childhood bed, $12 in my bank account, slinging coffee at Starbucks and dreaming in Italian at night, thinking, why did I just do all of this? Mm. And through a series of connections, I found out about a travel company in Dallas, Texas, that was a student travel nonprofit organization, and they needed Europe guides who spoke Italian. And so then a few months later, I found myself back in Italy, in Florence, where I had lived, leading a group of kids from Tennessee. And I remember very clearly thinking, this is what I was meant for. And that was at 25. So that really was the beginning of my journey as a tour leader. But then if you've ever worked for a nonprofit, you wear a lot of hats. And so in the course of my time working for this organization, I was a contract guide to a assistant trip coordinator. Became, for a year, I was the creative director because I went to art school. So I was doing all their marketing and branding. I was designing their art tours, both domestically and internationally. Then I was the director of the Europe department. And then I was also leading all of our trips throughout Europe. So it was difficult, but also it gave me a lot of perspective in all these different arenas that I feel has only helped me do my job much better because of that.
Yeah. It's amazing all those skills that you pick up along the way you may not be realizing when the marketing gets laid in your lap, or when, hey, can you plan the logistics on this transfer from the airport gets laid in your lap. But you take all those things collectively and they become the skill set necessary to launch your own tour company. So tell us, what was the deciding factor there to start Sudden Journeys, and what were some of the lessons from your past that you drew on that kind of allowed you to form your unique approach to travel?
That's such a fabulous question. I would say that the lessons that I've carried along the way, the first one, and if anyone has been a tour leader for any length of time, it doesn't matter how well you plan, how well the trip is planned for you, or you plan the trip, how well you execute it, something always goes wrong. And so I would say a big lesson I've learned is that there's always a solution to every problem, even if you want to crawl under a rock and die and pretend like you don't have to deal with it. You have to, because you have all these people depending on you. And also you're setting the tone for your trip. And so they're watching to see how you respond in what can seem like an overwhelming situation where they want to panic, but you're the voice of calm and peace. And that was it's been a huge lesson. It was not only are there always solutions to problems, but you always start with what you know. And so rather than just constantly sitting there like, well, I don't know what we do about this. It's like, all right, what do I know? How can we get through this? And so that's given me a lot of courage to be able to do things that seem a bit ambitious or intimidating or overwhelming logistically, to realize I know if I've gone through what I've gone through. If you get a bunch of tour leaders together in a room, we're going to sit and tell you all kinds of stories of things we've overcome.
Right.
But then I would say that, that's the more pragmatic side of lessons that I've learned. The other one that I think is even more important to what I do is the power of listening to your guests, to listening to those who are traveling with you, to asking questions. And you never know when you have an opportunity to interject something because you had a conversation with one of your guests that you can provide a moment that they wouldn't have had you not asked those questions. And there's a moment I remember when I was with a student group in Greece and I was doing a Footsteps of Paul tour. And I was talking to this one young man who was probably 15. And I asked him what he was most looking forward to on the trip. And he said, I really want to go to Patmos. I'm excited for Patmos because the book of Revelations is my favorite. And I thought that was interesting. And so when we were on Patmos and we're standing in front of the cave of Revelations, I asked this young man to read scripture there and he just lit up like group of 50 kids. I could have easily just given the information and shared scripture and then gone on to the next thing. But it was finding that moment to say, this is for you. And that's probably what he remembered, was that moment, connecting to it. And so finding those little moments to connect with people has become something I'm always looking for. And it's driven me to always take advantage of those moments. I think another opportunity I had with a group, I had a couple on a trip and I was telling them the history of a house we were at here in England where we were having afternoon tea. And because their last name is unique, it's called Purefoy. I said, well, there was a family that here in the 15th century with their same last name, which perked curiosity. So then that night they're at dinner on their own and they're researching their ancestry. They find out that their family ancestors were from literally 2 miles down the road from where we were. And they had no idea.
Wow.
And they're trembling. They couldn't believe it. And so then I said, do you want me to come pick you up right now? And I'll take you to the village. And they were like, what is happening? And so I took him into the village and I dropped him off at what's called the Queen's Walk. It's where there was a castle there. It's been there from the 1100s. And they walk along this path that goes up to this church, and it was at dusk. And I'll never forget dropping them off and then walking into the churchyard. And I said, I'll meet you on the other side and you come back. And again, one of those moments that had I not engaged those conversations or had the curiosity or pointed something out, they wouldn't have had those moments. And so I feel like that has become a huge part of what my trips are about.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. I love that approach. And I love that flexibility because there are definitely tour leaders or even company owners out there who would say, well, guys, we have an itinerary and your little village is not on it. So if you want to go there, you'll have to come back on your own. So I love you just being able to seize the moment like that. Now, so you mentioned experience with students. You mentioned an adult couple. There are many tour companies that say, I pick one of those lanes and I run in it. I'm a student tour company. I'm a adult company. I'm a seniors company. You have kind of taken the tack of saying, I'm just going to put together great trips. And you end up sort of attracting a bunch of different ages and generations. So how does that work for you when you get, boomers and millennials and Xers and maybe some Gen Z all on one trip? A lot of people would say, oh, that sounds like a mess. How does it work out for you?
I honestly love it. From the beginning, when I started my company, I wanted it to be available for anyone really from ages 10, more or less, up into, I have quite a few people in their 70s, as long as they can still physically walk and enjoy the trip, that I wanted it to be open to all genders, demographics, ages. It didn't matter, because we all have something to learn from one another. And so I've really enjoyed that. It's been surprising. I wasn't sure what I was going to get. And it's been surprising to see how almost every trip has been a mix. And it's been beautiful to witness it, just to see it kind of unfold naturally.
Yeah. So tell me about some of those dynamics. Like, are the younger people and the older people, do they approach each other cautiously at first and then kind of warm up? Or is it, pretty quick camaraderie?
Before the trip starts, I always send out an introduction email where I send photos and a little glimpse of each person, where they're from. So they already have a little sense of one another. And so they kind of take off some of those points that they've learned through just the email alone. But I would say it doesn't matter if I've worked just with student groups or if it's multi-generational. Day 3 is always the magic day. I don't know what it is. I've been doing this long enough now to see it happen. But day 3, I just see this emergence of the groups coming together, and the conversations are more effortless and comfortable. And you see one another being curious about each other and asking more questions and mixing up on the coach or on a dinner. And so it's been, I haven't seen there to be any issues, which has been nice, because I haven't had to force it, the mixing of people. And in fact, in my last group, I had an 11-year-old boy, and he was such a sweetheart and just well-mannered and respectful and vivacious, and had a bright light to him, and he brought youthfulness. And on the last night at dinner, I always ask the question, what left an impression on you on this trip and why? And he said, I thought that I would be cast away because of my age, but I wasn't. And he got vulnerable, and he started getting choked up, and then we were all getting choked up. And he was just being honest about how he felt so welcomed by everyone and included, and how much that meant to him. And it was so endearing and tender, and it gave so much to us that he wanted to be with us.
Yeah.
So it's been a really fun to witness.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Now, you've told me before that as you have taken out groups from different generations, you sort of started to perceive some of the recurring needs or the desires people have in travel, or the way that people, have their needs met through travel. And those needs are different for different generations. So can you sort of give us an overview of, what the boomer customer really is looking for versus what the millennial resonates with? And wherever Gen X is, Gen X, we get lost so often. But how do you see those generations, expressing and seeking out needs in travel?
Yeah, it's also a great question. So with the older generations, I have a lot of people who are traveling with me that are retired. And for them, they are living out dreams that they've had for decades, that they've waited to travel. This has been on their list. And so they're actualizing these dreams, and they have a wealth of experience behind them in their life. And so for them, their needs are everything from just those dreams in them of themselves, of actualizing them with them. But also they'll have a lot of need for help with just the logistics of understanding how to take trains and how to use the technology and how to purchase train tickets or use the apps, and so you're having to attend to those, just the logistical needs, but then also understanding that they have this decades of desire that they've waited to do this trip. Whereas I'll have people who are anywhere from 19 to late 20s, early 30s, and they're extremely savvy with all the technology. They don't need their handheld at all, but then they have a desire for connection that they've missed out on, that they're worn out from working from home, from online communities, they're craving connection. And so it's been having to keep both of those things in mind when I'm putting these trips together, that it's not an all this way or all that way, and that you have to just follow me in it. I'm having to kind of, for instance, just a simple thing is I'll email you. You can get the PDF of the itinerary that you can download, or you can get access it through an app. But then I also will send a physical booklet, because I know the older generations love to feel something tangible they can look at and read. So it's just learning how to attend to the different needs of the different generations, and not see that as a hindrance, but just as this is what I need to do in order to cater to the different generations.
Yeah. As you're saying that, it kind of triggered this thought in me that many of those people who are retired and coming on trips, they may be on an adventure they have deferred for 10 or 20 or 30 years, right? I mean, I think about, you and I are kind of in the same age group, similar phases in life. We got families at home, we got obligations, and there are tons of things that I would love to do. And I'm just kind of making a list of like, well, when the kids are grown, when the mortgage is paid, like one day in the future, there's all this stuff I would love to do. And when those people in that more advanced phase of life come on your trip, they're not just coming on a trip, but in many cases, they're bringing decades worth of saved and reserved hopes and dreams, and entrusting you to fulfill those. And that is a huge responsibility.
Yes, it is. And it's an honor too. It's a huge responsibility that at this stage of my career, I'm not intimidated by it. I see it as an honor and a positive challenge, because I know what I'm going to deliver for them. They don't know, but I know. And I get enough positive feedback that continues to affirm what I'm doing for them. But then I love the younger generations. I had a 19-year-old on a trip recently, and her mom actually signed her up for it. She followed me on social media and just felt like I was a safe person for her daughter to experience her first time to travel abroad. So she entrusted me with her daughter, and she was just full of life and brought the best energy to the group. And she was so excited about everything, and it was all new for her. And that newness was similar to those who were older, because it was all new for them, but they maybe were a little more reserved with their delight and surprise, whereas the 19-year-old was more expressive. And it was just it's fun to witness both, because it's just an honor to be able to serve them in both capacities.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. So you make a real point of creating opportunities for people to not just see sights on a trip, but really have meaningful moments, deep conversations, authentic connections. Can you share a little bit of your strategy, like how you create those moments? Are you planning them in advance? Are they just organic? Are you seizing an opportunity when you see it? What does that work out like?
So this is very much at the core of what I love to do. Whether you're coming to my house for dinner, or you're on a trip with me, or you're sitting next to me on a plane, you're probably going to engage in a deep, meaningful conversation, or DMC is what it's called. I spent time at a girls' camp in North Carolina, and that's what they would encourage the DMC, a deep, meaningful conversation.
I love it.
But it's a natural place for me to go, and so it's not that I have to plan it as much as I've cultivated this way. But for those who want to understand how to incorporate that, for me, it's been dinner is the biggest way but in order to have that at dinner, you have to create an atmosphere and a space of intimacy. So I will specifically choose restaurants or hotels with restaurants in them that are intimate. So I'll bring candles. If you've ever seen on Instagram, I'm always sharing about our dinner here at home. We eat by candlelight because it's so dark here in the winter. So we always eat by candlelight. So I bring that when people go on trips with me and then we have dinner together, they're like, I feel like I'm at Kyle's house having dinner with her because we're eating by candlelight. And so I will make a point to bring candlelight and flowers and set the tone of intimacy so that it draws people in. And then usually between either starters and the mains, or after the mains are finished and before dessert, I'll ask a question that's not a yes or no question, but one that provokes thought and processing the questions together. And it's always a great time to get to know one another better. And then the other opportunities I find are when you're going from maybe the end of an activity before dinner. Say you've got 20 or 30 minutes, and it would be real easy to tell people, oh, just hang out. We'll hang out here, or people will sit and scroll on their phones wait, just kill time. And instead, I'll use that opportunity to have a conversation, maybe about something more specific that has to do with where we are culturally, to give more insight. Or sometimes I'll use that time to ask me questions about my own life. And it just naturally leads to conversation that's more vulnerable, that's more intimate, and it's an opportunity for them to know me more. But those are the two main ways that I create that space for conversation.
Now, I know something else that you are really passionate about is creating space for people who maybe have been through some difficult situations to have some healing or some peace. How do you do that in a travel context?
Yeah. So, when I first had the idea for Sudden Journeys, it was before the pandemic, and I was approaching it from one perspective, and that was honestly not as interesting. And then the pandemic hit, and I was pretty devastated because it put everything to a halt, and it gave me a lot of time to reevaluate. I think all of us reevaluate certain priorities in life and what we're doing. And on the redemptive side of coming out of the pandemic for me was this desire to bring people to these places in order to instill a sense of wonder and awe, but also to be re-enchanted with the world again, because we came out of something that was collectively, as a global community, traumatic. And so there was the collective trauma of what we went through, but then we're human beings and living on this earth, we're not unscathed from suffering. And knowing that it's a known fact, we've all gone through something. You don't have to ask the question, have you gone through something? Rather, it's acknowledging, I don't know what's brought you here. I don't know what stage of life you're at, but it's knowing you've probably gone through something. And so what I do on these trips, and I don't always have this planned out. Again, it's really discerning the moment. But on this last trip, for instance, here in the countryside, I took them on a woodland walk. It's a medieval woodland that's ancient, and there's all the wild garlic is in bloom, and it's stunning. As far as I can see, you see wild garlic blooms, and it's fragrant, and the bluebells are full in bloom. And we did a walk, and then at the end of it, I stopped them and I talked to them about how much I love the Brits' ability to observe nature and to slow down and understand the sound of birds and identify them by their song and identify plants and flora and fauna and all of these things, observation. But then I just said, why don't you take this 30 minutes now to go and just be still, be present, to calm your spirit, to listen, to hear, to allow your senses to be aroused and stimulated, and to give yourself that permission to feel things that maybe you haven't allowed yourself because you go. And so it's acknowledging those things, and it's giving them the space. And oftentimes I'll read a poem, or I'll read a short story or something to set the tone for the moment and give them pause to feel and immerse themselves in that space. And so I do that several times throughout my trips. And I'll see and I'll notice out of the corner of my eye, oftentimes somebody wiping a tear away. And in those moments, I don't feel there's no need for me to rescue them or to say, oh, what's wrong? But I'm grateful that they feel safe enough to allow themselves that place to grieve or to feel or to be moved. Maybe it's just gratitude that they're feeling. But it's really, at the end of the day, if they had to cross an ocean to feel that moment, then it's an honor to give them that soft place to land.
So as you look out on the horizon, the future for Sudden Journeys and for tourism in general, What are you hoping to see, say, next year and beyond? I don't get the impression that you're on a world domination path. So how do you, sort of intentionally and thoughtfully plan ahead for the future of your own company?
I am in this season of the wonderful season of growing pains of asking myself the same question of where am I going with this and why? And one of the things I'm really excited about is I'm doing a lot of partnering with writers and musicians, with artists who have wanted to create experiences for their audience, but don't have the time or the ability or the know-how to create these trips abroad. And so they come to me and they say, can we partner? And which I love, because then I'm not having to market it. I don't have to go find the people because it's all through them, but I get to do what I love, which is create this trip for them, this experience, whether it's a workshop or a retreat or a tour. And so I'm really enjoying that. I'm getting more and more of those connections. And it also allows me just to get really creative with what we do, because really it's the sky's the limit. You can create whatever you want, and the people who want it will come. And I tell people this all the time who are insecure about creating something. I say, look, there's 8 billion people in the world, and all you need is 12. That's it.
That's right.
And so you can make that happen. There's 12 people out there who want what you want to provide. And it's how you go about sharing what that is. And so that's been a fun thing to do. And then I'm also listening to people and what they want as I'm sharing about where I travel. Rather than me creating trips out of what I think people want or what would be fun, I'm just getting the feedback. And then I'm creating trips around that feedback. For instance, I was recently in Paris, and I often and I'm always in London because I live near London. So I'm always getting people saying, I just want to go where you go. I just want to travel the way you travel. And so I thought, well, then I'm going to put together a London-Paris trip that is basically, if I were just going by myself, this is exactly what I do. Stay out late listening to jazz in Paris, or I'm a photographer first and foremost. So in London, I love going out past 10 o'clock at night on a weeknight in Soho and capturing scenes. So I'm going to take a group of people capturing scenes through the streets of Soho. So it's fun to think about trips in a way that I never was able to before when I worked for another company. And then as far as where I see travel as a whole going, I think it's a really exciting time, because though I find that travel, and I'm sure you understand this, given you've been in the industry about the same time I have, the world feels so on fire and humanity on its knees. Mm-hmm. And the beautiful part of being a part of this industry is that we are part of the antidote to the divisiveness and the misunderstanding of people, that we get to be a part of bringing people together and imparting understanding and insight into cultures and places. And it's an exciting time to have the opportunity to do that. And there's a responsibility that comes with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I am right there with you. I agree 100% about the moment we're in and the opportunity we have to, just like you said, be the antidote to so much of the division and acrimony that is making life miserable, really all around the world. It's not just here in the States, right? I mean, it's challenging out there for everybody. So yeah, I love that. So what is the best way for people to follow you on social media or learn about your company and maybe even get in touch or get involved?
Yeah, so my website is mysuddenjourneys.com. And that's one way to find me. I'm active on Instagram. I'm told to be active on all the other social media, but I can only give attention to so much.
Right.
So Instagram is the best way to connect with me. And that's simply Sudden Journey, is at Sudden Journeys. And if you send me a message there or through my website, then I'm absolutely willing to connect and have a conversation. And I'm also in the process of hiring guides and training guides to take over trips. And so that's a new phase of what I'm doing as well.
Yeah. Wonderful. I love it. Well, before we let you go, we have some questions we ask everybody, and these are just for fun. So no pressure. You can just kind of answer off the top of your head. First question is, when you travel, do you book a window seat or an aisle seat?
Window seat always.
Yeah, just for the view?
Yes, I love the view.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with that. So what's one thing in your carry-on that you would never leave home without?
Oh my gosh. One thing in my carry-on, a good book and my journal, definitely my journal. I've been keeping a journal since I was 14, and my journals tell my story and all the places I've traveled and recording all the moments and experiences. And I go back and I love to read about where I was on this date 7 years ago and where I was. So absolutely my journal and a good book.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. So if you had a free airline pass and a week with nothing else to do, where would you be headed next?
The country of Georgia. That's one on my list. I'm love to explore that country.
Yeah. Yeah. Intriguing. I know so little about it. It would be fascinating to see it.
When they have this culture around, I think it's called Supra or Supra. I'm probably saying it wrong, but it's all around hospitality and gathering people over a meal, which I love. And so I want to experience that part of their culture.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds great. So last question, what is one thing you have seen or done on the road that you wish you could go back and experience again with somebody you love?
Oh my gosh. That's such a great question. There are experiences I haven't done that I've held off doing until I could do them with someone. But to go back and do things again, I don't know that I would. I don't know that I would go back. Yeah, when I think about it, because some of those moments were meant just for me, and I'm grateful for them. And I did just recently, one thing that was huge on my list that I've dreamt of for the longest time was experiencing, because I lived in Italy and I've spent most of my career leading tours throughout Italy, was to take my kids. And I did that this last March, and that was a dream come true, was to experience it through how they saw it and what they enjoyed. And that was a lot of fun for me.
Yeah. Well, that sounds beautiful. I'm so glad you got to do that. I hope those other things that you're saving on the list all come your way as well. And you and your family can dig in and enjoy those times. So Kyle, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate it.
Well, I sure hope you enjoyed that conversation with Kyle as much as I did. I found her really thoughtful, really smart, and really inspiring, and I hope you took a lot away from that. You know, I talked to Kyle for over 40 minutes, and there was so much good stuff there. I wasn't able to include it all in this podcast episode, but fear not. If you want to hear everything Kyle had to say, you can find the entire unedited interview on our YouTube channel. Now, I'll link to that in the show notes. What will you find if you go watch the interview there? Well, you'll hear Kyle tell stories about how millennial customers have encouraged and inspired her to rethink some things in her own life. You're also going to hear her thoughts on how to connect meaningful conversations to actual moments in a tour itinerary. And she's going to break down her strategy for timing out tour itineraries so that they create maximum opportunities for personal impact. These were all such good points. I didn't have room for them all in the podcast, unfortunately, but they are worth the listen. Head on over to the YouTube channel. Check it out there. You'll be glad you did. Now, before we move on, I want to take a couple minutes and review some highlights of some things that Kyle said that I found really helpful, because I want to make sure you don't miss them. When she was talking about lessons that she learned from leading tours early in her career, she said, "It doesn't matter how well you have planned. Something always goes wrong. But the biggest lesson I have learned is that there's a solution to every problem." And she went on to say, "You are setting the tone for your trip. They're watching to see how you respond. And what can seem like an overwhelming situation where they want to panic, you're the voice of calm and peace. There are always solutions to problems, and you always start with what you know. This is such a great reminder, really, for anybody in any kind of leadership position, whether you are standing in front of a motor coach, whether you are leading your staff back in the office. Things are going to go wrong. It's a fact of life. So, number one, better be prepared. Number two, better keep your wits about you. Keep a cool head, and remember, the people you are leading are going to follow that lead that you give them. So stay calm, think hard, draw on your past experience. You're going to get through it. Now, when we were talking about the needs of different generations when it comes to group travel, Kyle said that retired people are living out dreams they have had for decades. They have waited to travel. They're actualizing these dreams, and they have a wealth of experience behind them in their life. She said people who are 19 to early 30s are extremely savvy with technology, but they have a desire for connection that they're missing out on. They're worn out on working from home and online communities, and they're craving connection. She said, I'm having to keep all these needs in mind when I'm planning trips. I think this is really insightful, and I think Kyle is a great test case demonstrating that you don't have to necessarily exclude a huge part of the population from your target market. You can bring boomers and Xers and millennials and people from other generations together on one trip if you are just sensitive to the differences in where they're coming from, what their expectations are, what their dreams are. Keep these things in mind, serve each person well, and you can deliver a really meaningful and enriching multi-generational experience for everyone on board. And finally, when we were talking about creating meaningful moments during trips, Kyle said, for me, dinner is the biggest way to do that. But in order to have that at dinner, you have to create an atmosphere of space and intimacy. She said, I'll pick restaurants that are intimate. I'll bring candles with me and we'll eat by candlelight. And she went on to say, I'll ask a question that provokes thought, and we process that question together. It's always a great time to get to know each other better. You know, I love the intentionality that Kyle is talking about here because so often I think we go into group travel situations knowing that there's the potential for something really cool or powerful to happen, but not really taking any positive action to see it take place. We just sort of hope that those things will come about on their own organically. Well, Kyle takes this point of view, and I agree with her that the best moments happen because someone has done the work ahead of time to create space for them to happen. Now, do you need to bring candles to every group dinner? Maybe you don't, but I would encourage you to look through the way you do group tours and see if there are moments of intimacy, of connection, of relationship building that you can facilitate by taking steps ahead of time. Great stuff there from Kyle Campbell. Well, a couple of weeks ago, the online travel site Thrillist published an article called Why It's Time to Let the Group Trip Die. Now, in this article, the author, Ophélie Garcia Lawler, goes through a list of things that can go wrong when groups of friends travel together. She listed things like disagreements over where to go, what to do, who to invite, and how much to spend. And she comes to the conclusion that friends should give up on traveling together in groups and instead just go on vacation alone. Now, I have some thoughts on this article, and those are going to be the topic of today's Hot Minute. Yeah, that's right. The Hot Minute is the portion of the show where I take 60 seconds to give you my unfiltered views on an issue that impacts tourism every day. And today, we're talking about whether it is time to let the group trip die. So let's put 60 seconds on the clock and get into it. Ophélie, I feel your pain. Everything you pointed to is a real issue in an unstructured, unorganized group vacation. When people travel together without smart planning, the results can ruin trips and strain friendships. But I disagree with you on the conclusion. The challenges you're facing on casual group trips don't mean everyone is better off traveling alone. They mean you need to learn how to do group travel better. There's an entire industry of travel professionals who have figured out how to take all the pain out of group trips and give you consistently fun and memorable experiences. They can handle the itineraries, the logistics, the payments, so you and your friends can simply enjoy the destination and each other. So here's my suggestion. Next time you think about taking a group trip or publishing a hot take, maybe do some research first. Well, that's the Hot Minute. That's how I see things anyway. Of course, you are welcome to disagree with me, and we can still be friends. And hey, whether you agree or disagree, we would love to hear from you. That's right. You can send your thoughts, questions, ideas, your own hot takes to podcast@grouptravelleader.com. I read every email that comes into that address. I really do love hearing from you all. And you never know, your thoughts and ideas may just be the topic of the next Hot Minute. And hey, while you're in the mood to give us some feedback, would you do me a big favor? Go to your favorite podcast playing app, and if you haven't already subscribed to the show, then by all means do that there. And while you're there, would you take a few minutes to give us a rating, leave us a review? Those are super helpful, and I am so thankful to everyone who has done that so far. My thanks as well to Kyle Campbell for joining us today. On the next episode of Gather and Go, I'm going to bring you a really interesting conversation with travel influencer Shanae Braxton. She is going to open our eyes to how travel professionals can partner with content creators to grow their audience and their customer base. That's a conversation you won't want to miss. Until then, though, remember this. At the end of the day, we're all on this trip together, so let's make it a good one. See you next time on Gather and Go. Gather and Go is hosted and executive produced by me, Brian Jewell. Our publisher is Mac Lacey. Danya Simmons is our creative director. Ashley Ricks is our circulation manager and graphic designer. Our sales team is Kyle Anderson and Talisa Reck. To advertise on the podcast, call Talisa at 859-253-0455. Gather and Go is a production of the Group Travel Leader. For more information about our magazines, podcasts, and events, visit us online at grouptravelleader.com. This episode was brought to you by Coastal Mississippi. Plan your best trip to Coastal Mississippi. Suntime recreation and dinner time reservations will have you losing track of time with beautiful waterways and scrumptious seafood. Visit coastalmississippi.com and go have some fun for fun's sake.